One.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Lower Makefield Township Ad Hoc Property Committee meeting. My name is Dennis Stedman, chairing the meeting this evening. And if you're viewing from the public, we're very pleased. We want your input and we appreciate your interest. This committee has been charged with generating a long-term master plan for the Patterson Farm property in Lower Makefield Township. It is an agricultural property and a historical property. We have a lot of, we've had a lot of comments and discussions about what's been done on the property or not done on the property over the last 20 plus years that the township has owned it. But that's not our way of thinking. We want to look ahead and envision a new scenario where the property is of value to the community and can justify township spending. So we know, as has been said in the past, that we remain in agriculture. We know there's important historical structures there, and we also want good community utilization of it. So with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Tonight's agenda is very short. One, we're going to approve the minutes from our December 19th meeting. And then we have the good fortune of an opportunity to interview two contractual bidders that have responded to the RFP that was issued. And it's the committee's opportunity to ask questions and to hear directly from those contractual bidders beyond their paper submission. So respecting everyone's time, I'd like to turn it over to Beth to please, as our secretary, to seek approval of the December 19th meeting minutes.
Yes. Dennis, do you want to wait on introductions? We have a new member tonight.
Let's do that. Thank you, and I'll introduce the new member. Let's stick with the meeting.
We'll go back. The minutes of December 19th were distributed, and I'd entertain any corrections to those minutes at this time. Hearing none, I'd move that they'd be adopted.
I second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Did we get everybody? Thank you.
Great.
Back to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Pat. And shame on me. The committee does have a new member. Ron Schmidt is on this call. Ron has been a Lower Makefield Township resident for decades. Very skilled business executive in corporate communications, and a lot of experience with historical, agricultural, real estate or assets, if you will. For the last 10 years, Ron's been the chairman of the help me out, Ron. Pennsbury Manor Foundation. Thank you. A key historical site in Pennsylvania, and so Ron brings a lot of experience to the committee. And Ron, welcome. We appreciate your volunteering to step up. We know this committee is work, but it's going to be well worth it in the end.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of it. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay. Welcome. And with that, I want to turn it over to Jennifer Stark, our project manager for this project. And Jennifer, I'll let you orchestrate and run the interviews with the bidders on our RFP.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Happy New Year, everyone. Candace Lee is also on the screen. She's an assistant project manager, and she and I are the ones working on your project. A couple housekeeping is we have a hard stop at 8:30. We do have prepared questions that have already been provided to the architects. So I'm hoping that facilitates the conversation and moves it forward. I do think that this would be beneficial if it's a dialogue, and I'll let Margaret expand on that. But certainly It's more than just a presentation because we've already read their proposal and they've had an opportunity to see what some of our early questions are. So I will first of all turn it over to Connolly and Hickey to introduce themselves, and then I'll share my screen with our questions.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Hickey, Historic Preservation Specialist with Connolly and Hickey.
And I'm Tom Connolly, Principal Architect at Connolly and Hickey.
So we are an architectural and historic preservation firm in New Jersey. Our firm focuses primarily on the restoration and rehabilitation of older and historic buildings. We have been doing this since 2003 as our own firm. But two of us have been in the business since about the mid-1990s. And we've only really ever done preservation. So that's always been our focus.
And we don't do residential, we don't do commercial, strictly historic preservation.
We did put together a PowerPoint presentation, which may be helpful with regard to actually how we work through projects that would answer actually a number of your questions about how we operate. So do you think we could present that first?
That sounds great. No, that sounds great. I think it's easy for you to be able to share your screen just by hitting that share screen icon.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is just a cover. It shows that that the firm has worked on a number of properties that consist of multiple individual buildings, but then also make up a cohesive whole on a site in terms of also having to deal with the connections between the buildings. So one of the first and earliest projects that we worked on was at Waterloo Village, which is in Sussex County, actually spans between Sussex and County and Morris County, New Jersey. We worked for the state of New Jersey. And for that, we actually analyzed 21 historic properties, including landscape, developing recommended uses, recommendations, cost estimates, for a large variety of buildings, so residences, multiple barns, and buildings associated with the business operations at Waterloo in the 19th century. So that's the canal store on the lower left-hand corner. And this project, we worked with the state of New Jersey, but then we also worked with the Canal Society of New Jersey to prepare a National Register nomination for a boundary increase. The original boundaries for the village were only on the Sussex County side of the Musconetcong River. And so the boundary increase included re-looking at the history of the original section based on the preservation plan, and then increasing the boundary to include other properties associated with the history, like ice harvesting and railroads and a few other operations that happened on the other side of Musconetcong. And for this, I think this is a really good example of how we operate. So for several weeks, we went out as an entire team and spent an entire day going through the layers of the work. So field documentation to begin with regard to measuring the buildings, and then coming back, same kind of schedule to layer in the conditions assessment. So this way we come in it as a team. We get to a certain point, we bring in our consultants because our firm has a lot of the base materials that we have to work on before we bring in our consultants. And then the consultants take on the same schedule one day, either 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how much work they have to do. This is a smaller farm site.
Margaret, just a quick question on the use analysis. Could you expand on that particular example?
Yes.
What you did in terms of use analysis, which is very much a part of our master planning process.
Right. So when we first were engaged by the state of New Jersey, there was only one building in use at the time. And it was by the Canal Society of New Jersey. The site had been somewhat abandoned by a nonprofit, and the state of New Jersey was looking for a way to re-energize and bring uses back to the site. So we recommended a number of different uses. We will say that this was very much museum oriented in the core buildings, but then we also recommended partnerships with both for-profit and nonprofit organizations to use some of the later buildings or ones that could be more readily adaptively reused. The state of New Jersey has not implemented all of the recommendations, but they have implemented some of the recommendations thus far of the preservation plan.
Thank you.
Sure. So this is the Ayers Youth Farm, which is in Denville, also Morris County. We do a fair amount of work in a couple of counties in the state. This is a 9-property site, cohesive farming site that actually a portion of it is still used by a local farmer. And then another portion, which was not in our scope, was turned into ball fields. So we first engaged with them to actually to pick up a restoration that had stagnated due to a lack of funding and some bad advice by their previous architect. We finished up the interior restoration of the farmhouse, and then we told them that we recommended a master plan. We were able to secure funding for the master plan, and we did a full site analysis of the buildings, looking at the various aspects with regard to conditions assessment, recommendations. We brought in a landscape architect because access and parking was a big issue with regard to how the site would be used. And then for this, we also did a use analysis focusing on, so this is a nonprofit that operates the site on the behalf of the municipality. The municipality only gives them about $10,000 to $15,000 a year to operate this 9-property site and towards the restoration of the remaining buildings. So we focused here on how they could possibly generate revenue to make the site sustainable. So coming up with various uses and kind of building the nonprofit to be able to sustain this property going forward, as well as restore the building. So right now we only have 2 buildings that are restored. We have grants in this year for rehabilitating a garage to actually serve as accessible restrooms, and then to add a catering kitchen. So this way they can host wedding events and other and fundraising events and start making some money on the site.
Mhm.
So this is in the early stages, but the master plan actually projects for the next 25 years.
Margaret, when you make those recommendations, especially around revenue, how much of a financial analysis do you provide?
We don't really do the financial part. We really are more of the big picture and what would be feasible with regard to the amount of property, what the properties could sustain. We do a code analysis, things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Margaret, did you guys talk to stakeholders besides the nonprofit? You know that our project, we're going to get feedback from outside sources, not just the committee that you're seeing tonight.
Yes, for this particular project, for the state of New Jersey, it's different. They're not big on feedback from outside organizations, but for this one, we met with this group, and they did an advertisement to bring in other local people to come in. So we met with them twice to review and get feedback on what we thought would be feasible. So yes.
Thank you.
This focuses more readily on our experience with barns. This is actually a living history museum in Morris County, Morristown. It's operated by our Morris County Park Commission. And this was a multi-phased project. We did historic structure report for the barnyard complex, made recommendations which included actually removal of the superstructure of the main barn and rebuilding it to its historic appearance, its late 19th century appearance, and rebuilding the silage. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, this was a long project too. We worked on this one for a number of years, but the main barn and the silage building, we had taken down the main barn structure and designed it and re-erected it to its historic appearance based on historic photographs. So you can see an interior view and the view from the exterior. It's connected to, was it the HOG shed?
Yep.
We also restored the farmhouse, which is on the other side of this building. So it was a multi-building complex, but what you're seeing here is just one of the main buildings, which is the main barn.
Right, but this kind of shows our experience with the heavy timber framing, that aspect of the site.
In the past year, I think we've worked on maybe five barns, or we're currently working on five barn structures.
Yeah.
Heavy timber frame buildings.
So this project is a little different. This is the headquarters of the Morris County Historical Society. The focus of we did a historic preservation plan for the site, including a landscape plan. We hired an outside consultant for that, but we worked together to develop the plan. We actually wrote the update to the National Register nomination based on history that was discovered while we were doing the historic preservation plan. The initial nomination was from the 1970s, which are never real good quality. And then we undertook an exterior restoration of the main house, because actually the interior of Acorn Hall still reflects its late 19th, early 20th century appearance. So there wasn't actually a lot to do there, but the carriage house had been disused and actually modified over time. And so we restored the exterior and the interior, and this is now a museum which displays the Historical Society's transportation. So their carriages, sleds, actual materials that are both from Acorn Hall historically, meaning that they never left the site, and other locally made carriages and things like that. And then upstairs is actually an architectural collection taken from buildings that have been demolished in the last 15 years within Morris County. So this kind of speaks more to sort of our approach with regard to finishes, getting a good understanding of how the building operated. So actually the beaded board finishes that you're seeing were actually shoved in the crawl space of the carriage house, and we were actually to be able to restore and reinstall all of that. So this is a little different site. This is the Boot and Iron Works. This is a major, actually one of the most significant iron manufacturing sites in northern New Jersey. We just finished a National Register nomination for the property, and at the same time we were asked to do a master plan. Now this is an archaeological site in that most of the resources associated with the ironworks, which are related not only to the manufacturer of iron product, but also transportation related, in that it was a confluence of several railroads in this one location and brought here specifically to facilitate the operations on site. So this is a multi-part project in that we were hired to restore the arch bridge, which is this picture of the aerial. This bridge was actually built in the late 19th century just to bring an iron pipe across the river in order to fight the fires that happened at the ironworks. This is probably one of the best preserved turntables in the state. You can still see it in the landscape. And then this is one of the vignettes that we have put together as part of the master plan, showing what the vision is for the site. This is going to be passive recreation, in most of the site, but then there's also an area of active recreation in terms of new fields, recreational field house, a lot of engagement. Boonton is a town that really suffered from the 50s until about 10 years ago, and is kind of on the upswing. And this is seen as one of the key sites to kind of help the community economically, as well as sustainability and a number of other elements. And this too, we haven't done it yet, will include public engagement. So we have been engaged with the public with regard to the preservation aspect, because a portion of this of Ironworks is privately owned, and there's been there's new development there. So we were brought in to help kind of advocate for preservation of those features. But we'll continue with the public engagement on how this is developed. So there's plans for community meetings in the next couple of months. So this is another barn we're working on, which is the Scott Farm barn. We're in part 2. This is historic. We did a preservation plan 2 years ago, and now the Borough of Mendham has asked us to rehabilitate. And part of the preservation plan, again, was to do a use analysis. It's a very difficult site. As you can see, the building is very close to the road. It's not a highly busy road, but there really is no room. It's an environmental sanctuary, in that only that little strip where you see from the car down the road is the area that we could develop. The rest of it has to remain undeveloped. And so this is going to be a 3-season environmental center. Do you want to explain what we did to come up with where we got here?
Yeah, well, we just completed our 75% contract documents. So we documented pretty much every timber in the barn building and drew every bent and figured out where the loads needed to be transferred, put in some new framing. This is an existing photograph that you see of the roof structure. But since it was a barn building, actually this was a building that was made up of 3 separate barns brought together. And so we had to do a little bit of some structural enhancement, especially in the basement level. We'll see where this goes.
Right, so we give you an example of sort of the level of detail that we put together our drawings, including when we do existing condition documentation. So this way, if there is drawings in the future, you've got something that's well put together in which to build upon any improvements that you plan to do.
Excuse me, Margaret, just a kind of a point of order. Jennifer, I'm sensitive to the time constraints. I know we have some specific questions that we wanted to be sure we had a chance to pose, as well as I'd like to have time to hear the company's thoughts on the Patterson Farm master plan per se, and their approach to that. So these are interesting examples, but I'm wondering, do we have? I want to be sure we have time for all the questions. I kind of leave that to you, Jennifer.
I'll flip it back to Margaret. How many more?
We can stop here if you want. I mean, I think the initial ones were really the ones that relate mostly to what we're talking about. So.
Okay, I have a question that relates to all of the projects. It seemed to me that many of the projects are county or state oriented as your prime client. Can you go through and list who the clients were? And the last one, I guess, had to do with the reconstruction of the barn, but that was for Mendham Borough. So how was the process different for the local municipality versus the larger state project that probably has more of a budget anyway?
I think it would make sense if we stick on task with what Dennis has outlined in terms of the questions and then open it up to questions from everybody, committee members, and then public. Because I think, Dennis, if I'm hearing you correctly, we are going to run out of time.
Okay, I was just asking for a summary of who the clients were. So I think that actually makes a little sense in terms of the presentation they just put on.
Sure, let's answer that question and then get to the others.
So,
Thank you, Steve.
in New Jersey, we're fortunate enough that nonprofits and government entities have access to state and county grant programs. And so for, let's say, the Borough of Mendham project, that actually gets funding from Morris County as well as from the borough itself.
Okay.
State of New Jersey is self-funded, and they have probably the least of deep pockets because they don't like to actually spend money on their properties. And then we also work with nonprofits who really could not do what they're planning on doing without state and county help.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we've got this list of questions. I'll go through it. I believe the first one is describe your overall project approach and the process. You're correct, Margaret. The first couple of projects you presented are very similar to what we're asking you to do for our project. Is there anything that you would like to specifically pinpoint relative to the Patterson master plan approach?
No, I mean, I think I think our proposal outlines it as well. We really do try to approach these sites very systematically and really want to try to get a very good understanding of everything before we kind of delve into the use aspect of things, right? I mean, code, there's a lot of factors that parlay into how something is used. We're always very concerned about a building not being suitable for a specific use. It could be overused or underused. So those are the things that we're very sensitive to, and having an understanding of the building and how the circulation and all that really helps to answer those questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and the next question is about your methodology regarding the grounds, the landscape.
Right. So we work with John Morgan Thomas, who's a landscape architect in Lambertville. We've worked with him probably for the last 8 years. And he's actually involved in a couple other master plans we're doing. Sorry, we've got a number of them. We do a lot of work along the Morris Canal. So we have to do a master plan because it's usually involves multiple sites and trails and things like that. But my understanding of this particular site is you're talking about a lot of overlapping potential uses and making sure that people, when they get to the site, they know where they're going and what they have to do, and having clear designated areas for the particular uses. I think also the site could probably do with some enhancements with regard to, something that is historically correct, but would also not rely just on signs to get people around, right? Using landscaping features and things like that. I think that would also benefit the site, so that you're not just relying on enter here for people to understand where they have to go and where they park and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Thank you. The next question is regarding your fee structure, and specifically, we were reacting to the add alternate pricing for doing further documentation on all those multiple outbuildings that we have. We wanted you to focus on the 3 primary big ones, but then we thought, well, let's get some pricing. If you could do all of them, what would it cost? So the prices were. We'll just explain how you arrived at them, because I know that there's some survey and there's drawing board time. So,
right, but there's also, I took it also in terms of that includes if we need engineering as well. So I lumped all of that into the one price. So it really is our firm doing the documentation. And I really based it on sort of the overall size and complexity compared to the core buildings. And then also, I mean, I know in the proposal we state that if we're going to look at the 3 sites and look at the use, you can't just look at those on their own, right? You've got to look at them in the context of everything else. But I also put in an allowance for more code analysis associated with those buildings if they're added to the site too.
Okay, so it's code analysis as well, which is a little bit more than
Right.
we asked for, but that helps explain it a bit.
And the cost estimates too. So if we're going to look at everything, right, what I did was basically everything we said we were going to do for the 3 main buildings.
Yeah.
We applied to those outbuildings with the understanding that we would do those outbuildings probably at the same time as we would be there for the 3 big buildings.
Okay. Does anybody have from the committee have any other questions about the fee for the outbuildings? If not, I'll move on. Okay. The assistance with the National Register nomination is now a non-issue. It will not be in any consultant's contract.
Okay.
Yep. Regarding the project schedule, we were interested in hearing your reaction to the time frame that we had laid out. Wanted to find out if you thought that was realistic based on past experience, the size of our project, things like that.
I mean, I did look at the schedule. I thought it was generous. It is a lot of work. And a lot of coordination. You did say about kind of giving more space for the review time on the part of the committee. I mean, I think that could be absorbed into this time frame because while people are looking at things, we could still be working, you know, for the most part until you gotta get to the end. Mm-hmm. So I know that kind of stuff can move around pretty easily. But I mean, I projected the schedule. I thought it was generous. It's got some flexibility in there.
Okay, even if we do select a couple of outbuildings or all.
I do think so. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The next one. Now, tell me if we interpreted this incorrectly. We counted for participation in 4 meetings, and we do think that there will be more than that required.
I did. Yes, it was one was sort of an initial meeting. We always include a kickoff, but I don't actually put that in the fee schedule. That's sort of what we do. Okay. One meeting, I think, with basically just you guys, really just to kind of give you a summary of what we found, mm-hmm. and then 3 public meetings, however they're structured.
Okay. I think
Jennifer,
that
before you leave that one, can I ask a question on that, please?
Yes.
Based upon some of your past experience, have you used other tools in your toolbox for ongoing public education? You know, it seems to me this is going to be a long project. And as we go along, I think we're going to want community involvement and understanding of how this master plan is developing. Can you give me other examples of what processes you've used to seek that sort of ongoing education and input?
Well, sometimes surveys, right? So if we can generate a survey, I mean, I didn't include that in this, but if you, like after the initial meeting, if we find that there's some ambiguity in some of the feedback that we're getting, maybe getting information or feedback in writing sometimes is more helpful because people aren't willing to kind of engage. And I think it's even harder if we do it on Zoom. So I would recommend actually in-person meetings over Zoom if possible. We have a fair amount of success with those. I mean, we're often surprised, like Morris County owns a property that's remote, and they were worried about putting money in. And so we recommended an on-site meeting. Actually, it wasn't even on-site, it was near the site. And they were pleasantly surprised by how much engagement they received and how much the building would be used. So sometimes it's more about who you reach out to than how you reach out to them, right? It's getting the right people in the room is really the important thing. But if you find that you're not getting feedback, maybe something in writing, like a survey monkey or something like that, might be something to add.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item, we just were commenting on jumping into the supervisor's schedule because we anticipate needing to go before them at a minimum once, probably twice. Your basic meetings, I do think that we would probably need, the kickoff meeting is internal, one internal meeting with you as you do your development, but 3 public meetings. We definitely would need another internal meeting to review your 100% draft.
Okay.
I just don't want to cut ourselves off at the knees because this is going to be an interesting process, and I'm sure there will be dialogue.
Right. When it comes to like internal meetings, we don't really, we're not very good at counting them.
Okay.
We do what we have
Yeah.
to do to move the project forward.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That's good to hear. The next item is about the information that we currently have that we can provide to you, which includes some significant structural information that's fairly contemporary. And we wanted to know, we did send you links to some of this information. Did you take into consideration that you had access to this and it'll help jumpstart your process?
We did. Our structural analysis is an allowance though. So if that turns out to be more useful than I think, then we'll apply that so that you won't get charged. But with our structural engineer, the way I did it the way we normally operate, to be honest, because I didn't want to be left short. But if it turns out that what we provide, that you provided, works for him more than we're originally thinking, then we would not charge his time.
Okay.
Yeah. But we have found that every structural engineer looks at things differently, and barns are complicated. And the 2 big barns are complicated based on our experience.
Yeah. The next question is about your process for reaching out to stakeholders. And you actually have touched on some of your thoughts on and in past experience, the idea of doing the survey if you're not getting verbal feedback. Anything else to expand on your thoughts on the process?
No, I think, like I said, it's really who you bring to the table and how you approach them. So I think what we would have to do is some pre-research to figure out who are the best, to make sure that somebody shows up, right? A lot of the times we find that you're sending a notice out to the void and you may not get the feedback you want. So we want to make sure that we're very specific in asking specific groups that you think should be engaged, or some things that we identify that should be engaged, to make sure that they get invited and feel welcome to participate. I think that's key to any public engagement.
So, Margaret, for projects like this, you mentioned getting the right people in the room. Who do you think are the right, or who would you suggest are the right people to get in the room?
I'll be honest, I don't know at this point. I mean, at other sites, it's been, look, we do a lot of historic resource stuff. It's been a lot of the local historical groups who need space. I think it is primarily for you, it might be more arts organizations, children's organizations, like groups that need space for children activities, camps, that kind of thing. So trying to identify like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, day camps, there might be a whole cadre of people, but I'll be honest, I'm not as familiar with your area to be able to say.
I think it's a collaborative thing. You'll pick our brains for for who we think of, and then it will probably snowball from that.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd like to do is actually like to see what else is out there. I think I said it in the proposal. I want to see how other sites are being used, right? Because you also don't want to be duplicative in your efforts, right? That would be one of our concerns. So kind of getting a feel for how other similar sites might be in a 25 geographic area, mile geographic area, and kind of figuring out what would work, if it could be duplicated, or if you have to go in a different direction. So,
Right.
Jennifer, just one more question on that, but just so that I'm clear, in terms of your proposal, what's included in the proposal right now is just several meetings, 3 public meetings. If we were to go and do surveys and other things in a larger context of public engagement, that is not currently in the current proposal. Is that correct, or am I incorrect?
I mean, as Tom and I said, we like to make sure that we get things done. If we find that the survey is going to be too cumbersome or more than what we can afford in the budget that we provided, we'll let you know. But it may just turn out that's probably the easiest way we're going to get engagement, and it'll be on us to take care of it.
Ron, are you thinking of things like a website to educate the public throughout the process?
You know, I think there's a whole variety of things that as we go through this process, I could even see the ad hoc committee or the supervisors or others keeping the public constantly engaged in what we're doing and keeping them informed. Perhaps even Bucks County Courier-Times or others are doing interviews of committee members or supervisors and others, so that there's an ongoing education and we don't get to an end point and suddenly lay a master plan on this community and everybody
no surprises.
oh my God, what did we just get?
Yeah,
So,
they don't like surprises as much.
Yeah, I was trying to think through, how over a period of time you would begin to sell this in, market it, if you will, to the community, as well as seek their engagement.
Okay. I'm sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
That's fine. This was great conversation. The last item is talking about providing highlights about relevant projects, and I believe that your presentation really did demonstrate that you know your way around an historic site with multiple buildings.
I have just a question. I'm familiar with many of those sites in New Jersey. What was the starting condition? Were they in structural disrepair? Did they have environmental issues with asbestos? Yada yada.
Yes to all of that.
Yes, we've met some pretty interesting conditions over the years. I mean, one project we didn't highlight, but it's the lock to east of the Morris Canal. When we started, it was a pile of rocks, and we just finished its restoration. So it's now a fully functioning building on the Morris Canal. So asbestos, we're pretty good at identifying potential areas for hazardous materials. We've seen all kinds of structural conditions. So yes, there's a variety.
Yeah, there hasn't been a building yet we haven't been able to restore.
No, yeah. Everybody else.
But whatever it cost.
That's right.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
that's the thing. I mean, that is the thing.
We're very good at that.
Yeah, we're pretty good at identifying. So that project for the Morris Canal, we recommended the town approach the DOT. And so that project, as well as including the restoration of the lock itself, was about $3.4 million. And
well, the Victorian house that you showed on your PowerPoint at Waterloo, what is that now used for? Is that a museum?
That one is still vacant.
It's still vacant.
Yeah, so there's 2 ends to the site. One end, they've restored a number of the buildings. They've received actually $3 million to restore some buildings at the other end from DOT, which they're about to do.
But we know they're still using our report as the Bible and to guide them.
And what is the use recommendation on that?
For that one, I believe it's for nonprofit use. So this way the state has somebody else other than themselves trying to occupy it.
And again, that's owned by the
It's
state.
owned by the state of New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Parks Department.
Okay.
Right. You used to work for them, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Amongst my questions revolve around the master, the planning process. It's, as you know, this isn't a project on restoring a barn or restoring a house. It's building a plan that may where that kind of restoration may be part of that plan, but it's building an informed plan that rich with information on costs, on creative reuses, etc. I'm more interested in hearing some of your thoughts about, how you build a master plan, not just, determine new support structures and how a building's restored. I'm very confident you can do that well.
Right. So for instance, for the Boot and Iron Works property project, what we did was, and I think it makes it more manageable, not only for us, but for the client to understand the vision. We kind of zoned the site to, identify the logical grouping of uses, and then talked about how those individual zones would work, and then how those zones would work with the other 3 zones that we did for the site, right? I think that breaking it down into manageable pieces, identifying those grouping of buildings that may work together. Now, that may just be a single building, or it could be 4 or 5 that work together, and then determining how all that can still mesh. And I think, based on previous experiences, phasing is really going to be critical here too, right? To kind of say, okay, what are the priorities? What are the low-hanging fruit that we can take care of and maybe get a building up to use very quickly? And then maybe what are the long-term, what in the long term, maybe something that's going to take 10 years before you actually end up using it, and what you need to do in between year 1 and year 10. So this way you still have a building at year 10, and then what 10 years, what it would look like in 10 years, what you would do. I think phasing is going to be super critical with regard to how you look at the site. When it comes to cost estimates, we do all our own internal cost estimating here. I've been doing it since 2003. We have a pretty good track record because all of our costs have to be used to get grants. And so they want everything to be really accurate. They never like us to go back and say, we don't have enough money. So we're very conscious of costs. And again, breaking things down into phases. We're really good about kind of prioritizing not only individual buildings themselves, but then, like I said, the site as a whole.
And
right?
Margaret is a certified cost estimator.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure phases, there's going to be multiple phases,
Right.
multiple zones. And as you say, a variety of potential interactions or between those zones and between those phases. So thank
Right.
you.
And you also don't want
I
to
have
do
a follow-up?
things twice. That's our biggest concern, is you do something and then you go back and you're doing it again because you changed your mind.
Right,
So
right.
Dennis, I have a follow-up on your question.
Please.
They did mention in your presentation that you would talk to the various museum commissions, the user groups that had to do with the installations for that kind of space, including the recreational. In this case, it is an active farm, and I want to make sure that part of the input that you do not fail to include is the input from the farmer, because he's not usually at our meetings, and probably because he gets up too early in the morning.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, no, understood.
Following up on Steve's point, I mean, it is an active farm. There are some, there is the origin of a brook that flows through the township there. There's some wildlife. How do you factor in some of these ecological conditions as you develop your master plan?
That's interesting because for the Boot and Iron Works, we just did that in terms of setting out zones that should not be touched. And I think since ecology is not necessarily our strong suit, it may be a recommendation in the master plan to engage with a local college that may be able to help you further develop, how you address the ecology on the site, right? Sort of identifying that it's an issue and then making a recommendation on what the next steps might be. But it might not actually lay out exactly what you need to do in the plan. That's what we just did for the Boot and Iron Works. We said, you've got some issues here, you've got the potential for bird watching and things like that, but we're not really the bird watching people, but this is what you should do next with regard to that.
Fair enough.
We have 6 more minutes, give or take. Any more questions from the committee and other participants in this meeting?
I did hear you say that most of the projects that you worked on were up in the Morris County area and for the state of New Jersey or local Mendham, Denville. Have you had a chance to do any projects in Pennsylvania?
No, we're about to work with Bolton Mansion once they get their funding secured. We have worked, so we're working currently with the Army Corps of Engineers at Beverly Veteran Cemetery, which is just over the river there. We work at Paulsdale. So we do work in South Jersey, the Princeton area, Burlington County, Hampton.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you give me a rough estimate on what some of those barn restorations cost?
Foster Fields.
Foster Fields was $1.3 million total
Just for the barn.
for the barn and then silage. Yeah. And then it was another $300,000 for the granary and hog shed.
Did that have bathrooms and plumbing and all that, or was that just
Nope.
No,
silage?
Yeah.
Okay,
That was just the framing.
Yep.
Some electrical.
thank you.
Both farms are eligible for the National Register. And as Jennifer said, we're going to move forward with the nomination, but do you make recommendations in terms of what implications that has in terms of funding for the renovations?
Yes. I mean, you want me the specific ones, or you just?
No. Just was
it's
wondering if that's-
incorporated.
is that in
It
your
is
scope?
incorporated into how we think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there was a statement earlier, Jennifer said that support of the application for National Historical Registry would not be part of the consultant's charge or remit. And that's not because that won't be pursued, just to be clear.
Okay.
A combination of our historical commission with Joe and Ron Schmidt with some of his state and county connections had some very, very productive dialogues just very recently on that very subject. And so we feel that that the township, that this organization together with its own resources can do that registration is the only
Yes.
reason that's pulled back from the from the contract. I don't want anyone to misunderstand that there's not interest in doing it. There certainly is.
That's excellent.
Well, hearing no further questions, I think that we've achieved our goal with 3 minutes to spare. Margaret and Tom, thank you so much for joining us and talking through your experience and particularly giving us highlights about your thoughts on our project.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very, very useful. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So we're waiting on the other group to come in at 8:30.
Yes.
Okay.
And I will share, they may have a presentation as well, but I have the questions that they have provided answers to. They gave us a response memo, so I will be sharing that document for our talking points.
I think they're joining. I think I see new people coming.
Here we come.
Hello, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me. This is Doug Seiler. Am I hearable and seeable?
You're not seeable, but we can hear you. We see your name, which is fine.
I see that. Yeah, my picture was there. Let me see if I can get the video restarted. It says I can't start it. I wonder if I would be really disappointed if we can't see each other.
We saw you a minute ago, Doug.
I know, Pete. I did too. I didn't do anything. That is so typical.
Doug, were you on the tour when we had the kind of the walkthrough?
I was. Yep. I remember your face very much so, Dennis.
Okay. Then I thank you. Then I think I remember yours, but that's not a lot for the rest of the committee.
Boy, this is very disappointing.
Doug, look at, you have a toolbar at the bottom, Doug, with video?
I do.
And
It says video, it says stop video.
You want to click on that just to check?
Video settings.
The little
Video.
arrow next to stop video.
There is one.
Yep.
Yes.
So do you have a choice to pick a camera?
Same as system, perhaps, video settings.
Yeah, the modern day Zoom version of reboot is just to drop off the call and come back in. And then that a lot of times fixes everything.
Should I do that, everybody? I'm really sorry.
I have information that you are visible on the Facebook feed, but you're not visible on our Zoom feed, to the extent that that is a clue.
Well, I think it would be a disappointment if I am not visible. So if you all will bear with me, I'm going to log off and log back on. Thank you very much.
Do a reboot, and maybe we can begin with Peter and just kind of get started.
So Peter, welcome to our committee meeting.
Yeah,
and
thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for joining. So why don't you introduce yourself and your particular skill set so everybody knows?
Okay, well, thank you. And this way we can just skip over my slide when we get to the part of that. We have a short presentation for you, so that's great. First of all, I just really want to thank everybody for inviting our team. We're very excited. We do a lot of work with Seiler and Drury, and we have a lot of fun with them and learn a lot of things, and hopefully, I think most of the time, produce some good work. Simone Collins, we're landscape architects, and we've been in business. This will be in July, it'll be our 33rd anniversary as Simone Collins. And myself and my partner, Bill Collins, we've been both practicing for over 40 years, and we actually started working, first time we worked together was back in 1976. So we've been associated working together for a heck of a long time. What Simone Collins does is we do a lot of master plans and construction documents. Our largest construction project as prime was for DGS. We did a $24 million project at Lincoln University, and we've done master plans. We just finished one for Mercer County for a quarry rehabilitation with a cost estimate of $47 million to turn an old quarry into a new park. So even though we're a small 12-person firm, we do a very wide range of project types, including projects with historic significance and others. The other thing that we've done some good work in, I think, is with sustainable agriculture. We've been fortunate to work on a number of agricultural projects. One was the Lundale Farm Master Plan, which is the legacy homestead of Sam and Eleanor Morris. And if you know anything about Pennsylvania history in terms of land preservation, they're sort of the godfathers of farm preservation in the state of Pennsylvania. I was fortunate to work with their children on the master plan for Lundale Farm, which is an organic farm that's sort of an incubator space right outside of Pottstown. Also did a study a few years ago for the Green Space Alliance called Transforming Open Space to Sustainable Farm Enterprises, where we looked at a 5-county region and looked at all of the sort of non-active open space and looked at the potential and ways and what could happen economically if you could capture some of that land and turn it into sustainable ag. We've done a few projects involving PHMC. We did the site renovation for Pennsbury Manor up in Bucks County.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We did worked with PHMC through DGS there. And we just finished a master plan for the Daniel Boone Homestead in Berks County, where our client was Exeter Township, but of course the owner of that almost 600-acre site is PHMC, and that was a very interesting project where we really emphasized the connection between Daniel Boone living off the land and his family living off the land in today's sort of climate crisis, where our survival might be based upon how we are stewards of that land. It's a manageable site. We think the public can understand those connections very well. So we've done other historic projects we can talk about when Doug gets back, but that's just a quick overview of what we do. And we also do a lot of public participation during the pandemic. We had virtual public meetings with over 250 participants. So we do it virtually, but certainly it's a lot more fun in person. So I think if Doug's back, I'll stop and.
I think I am, Pete. Can anybody see and hear me?
Yeah,
yes.
Good.
Hey, Doug, yes, we see you.
Great. All right.
We also see Bob Powers. So welcome.
Yes.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Bob.
Hello, Jennifer. How are you?
I am good. I haven't seen you in decades.
I know. Where you been?
So, Doug, we understand you have a presentation too.
I do. Yes.
If we can do the presentation till 9 and then jump into the Q&A part that you provided answers, then I think we'll be able to cover everything we need to cover.
That would be great. So I don't know if our IT person can share my screen or if I'm able to share my screen by clicking a button. Does anybody know how to do that?
You can. If you highlight that menu that comes up and there's a share screen in green.
Yes.
Like that, you should be able to show whatever document you've got.
Okay, I'm going to assume it's this screen. I'm not at my normal computer, which is a little awkward, but let's see if I can find this presentation. And let's hope it fills the screen. Does anybody see this opening, I hope?
No, not yet.
No.
Really?
Do you have the presentation open, Doug?
I do.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, try unsharing your screen and then sharing it again once the document.
So Doug, what you're going to want to do is open the presentation on your desktop.
Okay.
And then come back into our Zoom call and click the green share screen button down at the bottom.
Okay.
And then you'll be able to select just that presentation.
Okay. So I have it open on my desktop. I'm going to click the share screen button. And what's it say here? Allow Zoom to see your screen. I will say allow, I presume.
Yeah.
Wow, I have to select multiple screens. Isn't this interesting? Apparently it's screen 1.
Pick the one you want.
Well, it doesn't show me pictures. In theory, I did that. And now it says new share. Should I select that?
Yes, if you click that, we should then be able to see your screen.
It says I'm screen sharing and it shows my screen in the preview, but you all are not seeing it, I guess, by the sounds of your voices.
Yeah, we would rejoice if you heard it. We saw it.
Why is it me that has to be this
Doug,
first
it looks
person?
like that's on the other device you have in the call that's still in our main room here. Is where that looked like you were sharing.
Hey, Doug, let me try sharing it because I have it open. Hold on here.
Someone
Yeah.
else has it, yeah.
It's a little different, Pete, but it's close enough. What's missing are Bob
there we go.
Powers. Well, we see something. Are you seeing a screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
I just shared it, Doug, so you tell me when the advance, go ahead.
So what screen am I looking at here, Pete? Yours, I presume?
Yes.
Can you go to slideshow full screen? Do you know how to do that?
Yep.
So Bob, I have to apologize. I put some nice slides of yours in at the end and they're not going to be there. So
Oh, no.
you'll have to wax poetic.
Oh, man. How could I describe these projects?
One of my favorite buildings is in of yours, though. So are you ready, Pete?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I think I'm accurate in saying that both Peter, Robert, Charlie Timby, and my whole office have that same feeling. Let's go to the next slide. I'll go through these pretty quick. I tend to bring images. I think the real strength of this team, frankly, is the team itself. We're very versed with every aspect of the things as we think might be at your site. We don't know the site like you do, but Seiler Drury Architecture lives in the building reuse and the preservation world. Bob Powers lives in it more than I do, which is why he's here, because of his deep expertise. You're still much alive. I've done several projects with Bob. The most recent one is, and the most kind of dramatic one is Founders Hall at Girard College, which is a National Historic Landmark, where Bob advocated for us at PHMC, at the NPS, direct conversations with them, the Philadelphia Preservation Alliance, the sort of commission, where each of those organizations took a site visit to see what we're up to, where we are doing what you all said, a phrase that's dear to my heart, that if you don't use buildings, you lose them. And we're opening a wall inside this building, and it's a fantastic project. And Bob has been indispensable. Simone Collins, we've done several projects with. We'll talk about some of them later. I adore the firm. I adore the people. We think alike. And when I saw this project, I immediately said, I need Bill Collins and Pete Simone's input, even if it's only talking about the farmstead properties themselves, you know, and how they relate to the bigger picture, whatever that picture is. And Timby I've worked with for, 30 plus years, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. Next slide, Pete. Why us? I kind of just said it. Deep building reuse and sustainable design experience, deep preservation chops, very deep knowledge and understanding of how buildings and uses and sites operate. And I think the fourth one is the process that we hope to bring, which explores and asks questions. And I think each of us on this team have a way of finding success out of what are sometimes sticky wickets. Next. Our firm, really, we've been founded in 23 years or so. We're smallish. We do 60 some projects a year. We've got 2 projects we did with Bob recently that were Preservation Alliance Grand Jury recipients. This upper right project is a barn that was part of a study at Harriet Wetherill Park in Plymouth, that Plymouth Township owns, that we converted into a nature center. And the bottom right drawing is a little watercolor sketch I sent to Pete on the Mermaid Lake project that he then iterated back to me, and I'll show you his drawing a little later. Next, please, Pete. Just to restate it, preservation's really been my, I consider myself a generalist architect. My real passions are sustainable design and preservation. So I consider myself a conservationist and a preservationist. And I've lived with these types of projects since '83 or so. The upper right is, both of these are the Preservation Alliance Grand Jury's. Upper right's a storefront Gothic Revival building in Germantown, and the lower right is Waldorf School in Philadelphia. Next, Pete. Building reuse is really what our firm has built itself around. We philosophically like the idea of reusing buildings. Sometimes quite a few of them are just industrial or offices or somewhat banal things, houses. The upper right is a brewery and a factory building. The lower right is a mill that PHMC asked us to study flood-proofing it for an adaptive reuse. That's in Fort Washington. We think reuse is philosophically and artistically a perfectly valid undertaking. Next. And then our other real strength is municipal design. We've worked for county, state, federal, many townships. So we understand all the multi-prime prevailing wage, not that any of that applies to this project per se, but we've done projects for public safety, public works, Parks Administration. Upper right is one of our first projects for Malvern Borough Hall to put an addition on a school. In the lower right, maybe some of you might know it, it's the Black Horse Inn in Flowertown, which was a big political football for decades that we finally restored with, hydraulic lime stucco and nice cedar and standing seam metal and all that good stuff. Next. Pete, I was going to just use this to introduce you. You've spoken some about yourself, but it's an opportunity to say what you want to say about yourself and maybe first thoughts on the project.
Yeah, sure. And I won't go over what I already went over with the committee. I should mention that I'm really filling in tonight for Bill Collins, who, if our team gets the job, will be working with you. Bill has done a good amount of what I'll call cultural landscape work. His chops in the historic area are much better than mine. But as a firm, we've done a lot of different things. And I mentioned to you some of those earlier. A couple that I didn't mention is we've just finished a master plan for the Lancaster Conservancy for an 1,100 acre site where we're going to include permaculture in the form of a food forest. And I think, one of the things that's very exciting for me, if we were to get this project, is thinking of agriculture at the Patterson Farm in terms of permaculture and things like food forests, because it's a very valuable type of agriculture. And the other thing that is exciting to me, I know the gentleman who farms now for you does a great job, but to get more diversity into the farm, because diversity in farms, it's been shown, it's been studied, creates greater biodiversity with birds, especially in the area. So I think there's some really interesting and exciting opportunities to think about the land here and how to conserve and preserve and enhance the soil, which is really the whole reason that the farm is here. So I'll leave it at that. We can get into more at the discussion. So thanks, Doug.
You can hit the next slide, Pete.
Yeah.
So this slide's the same opportunity for you, Bob, to talk about Powers and Company. I put the Scranton Electric building there because I worked in Scranton for a while and adore this building, and Bob's working on it right now.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Doug. Yeah. Let me do a quick introduction of myself and my firm. The firm is Powers and Company. We've been around since 95. We have probably completed over 120 National Register nominations since 2000. So probably of all folks working in Pennsylvania, I think we've probably nominated the most buildings successfully in the state. So we're well versed in the whole National Register program, what it takes to get a building listed on the National Register. So we have done many, many of those. In addition, we do a lot of compliance work and Section 106, Section 106 compliance, tax incentive work, which also goes to assessing buildings. What are buildings all about? What's the character defining features of buildings? Where is the priority of buildings in terms of adaptive reuse? And where do we go, and what's the best direction to head? So again, we've done over 100 plus buildings in Pennsylvania as well as in 10 states. that are being rehabilitated. So we're well versed in the whole rehabilitation market. We also have good connections with the folks at the state office, certainly in Pennsylvania and many of the other state offices, since we work with them pretty exclusively over the years. Prior to starting Powers and Company, I actually worked at the National Park Service for 12 years in the regional office in the National Park Service. So I have a little bit of green blood in me that way. I just wanted to go through a couple of our recent projects. I know that Doug was going to include those photos, but they're not unfortunately available. So we just recently finished one of the former Philadelphia Inquirer building on North Broad Street in Philadelphia, a conversion into the Philadelphia Police Department. Did the National Register nomination, assessment of all the interior and exterior features. And one of the major issues that we confronted there was dealing with the terracotta on the exterior of the building. It had been painted over really generations. And we stripped all the paint off the terracotta to get it back down to the original terracotta. And what an undertaking that was, but the final result is quite startling. So that's a recently completed project. Also, I don't know if folks are familiar with the Smith Playground in Fairmount Park. Really cool project, built in 1899, designed by James Windrum. It was designed as a park for kids, playground for kids, even at that point during the playground movement. So a very interesting program, continues as a playground and really just enhanced the overall quality of that building. Again, working with the architects on what's important about the building, what do we need to save, what's the real character defining features of the building, and moving forward from there. Let's see what other project we had here. Building B, we just finished a really quite remarkable restoration of one of the last remaining officers' buildings at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And this is an incredible building built in 1850. And it was literally propped up with, structural engineers would love this, but literally was propped up with steel and wood beams to just keep it from falling down. And the final result is quite startling how it's really been totally restored. So those are some of our past projects we worked on. Let me just mention a couple of our current projects that we're working on. One is we just started the National Register nomination for Cheney University, which is a really remarkable historically Black college and the resource there in Chester County. So we are in the process of doing that nomination, which includes over, I think, about 50 some odd buildings as part of that nomination. So that's in the works. We're also working on as you see here, the Scranton Electric Company, a National Register nomination, and also working with the historic tax credits on that. And this building has a remarkable amount of interior fabric still remaining from its original use as the Scranton Board of Trade. So it's a real challenge to adaptively reuse it, but we're able to retain the vast majority of all that really amazing interior fabric as well. So
that's great.
And one other project we have been working on is, and again, I wish I had the photograph of that, but the S.L. Allen Company building, also in Philadelphia, but it was the home of the flexible flyer sled, where they manufactured the flexible flyer sleds for upwards of about 75 years until about 1960, when they moved to Ohio. The building is in incredibly poor shape, but it will be renovated and will be restored to its original appearance. So some good projects in the works, some good projects we worked on, but just to give you just general flavor of the kind of work we do, and looking forward to working with you on this project as well. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlie Timby. Oh, I'm sorry.
Doug, real quick. I'm sorry. I just wanted to let you know that we do want to get to the Q&A portion, and I budgeted that to start at 9. So I'll let you determine how you proceed.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're okay. So I think we'll make it there, Jennifer. I appreciate it. So the next fourth leg of our stool is Charlie Timby Engineers. This is the Thunderbird Lodge in Rose Valley that he and I have been working on for several projects. As we've been restoring it, it's gotten 2 Keystone Preservation grants from the state. and it is a multi-phase, multi-year project. This is the current one, which is rebuilding the studio porches. And I love Charlie so much because he draws better than architects. And that's just one of his sketches for strengthening the studio floor. Next slide, Pete. I think we know the goals, but I'll say them: remain largely agricultural, do your best to preserve community buildings, and you need a purpose for buildings for them to remain viable. Music to my ears. I'm going to skip over these. I just have them here so we can refer back to them, Jennifer. And you have my answers. I included a schedule so we can refer to that. We're essentially looking at a 5-month period. Next period, next Pete. You skip one, but it doesn't matter that much.
Sorry.
Just to say, I have the fee available so we can talk about that if needed. And then the next slide. So I've got a few examples of my projects. This is Mermaid Lake Park that Simone Collins was doing a master plan of for Woodpain Township. They brought me in to look at the buildings. This is the barn complex, which was several buildings which we've raised that were part of this that weren't very good. And this is Pete's final drawing that sort of was the pushback to me in response to the watercolor I showed you earlier. Next, please. This is a project I worked on with a different planner that's very similar, I think, in character to your site. This is Harriet Wetherill Park. Plymouth Township owns it. They were gifted it. It had multiple buildings, a horse ring, barn, stables, manor house. We did studies with the planners. This had a market analysis involved where we studied bed and breakfast, office, event venue for each of these different buildings. Essentially, we ultimately raised most of them because they didn't want to be landlords, didn't want to have mothballed buildings. The house wasn't that old. It looked old, but it was from the 20s and wasn't that high quality. Essentially, we ultimately left the barn that I showed you a picture of earlier. Next, please, Pete. I'm going to just show you one final project, which is some drawings, because drawings came up. What kind of drawings can we do for the kind of fees we're talking about? This is Marywood Park House for Conshohocken Borough. It dawned on me when I put this together, a drone might be kind of interesting for your projects. I wanted it on this one to see behind that tower because I couldn't tell what that roof was going to be. Next, please, Pete. So we studied it. Next, please. Drew the existing conditions. Next. Proposed uses. Next. This exterior elevation. When the plan was over, they hired us to the next slide, Pete, to restore the porch. This is a rendering we did showing a restored porch that was just a stone terrace, basically, when we approached it. Next slide, Pete. And then we did working drawings for them. And next slide, Pete, for them to bid it and construct it. Next. I think we stated these are 4 points for why we think we're here. Really, the upper left is kind of what gets me the most excited, a chance to work with these guys. I thought all of you, the energy you brought to that pre-bid, the fact that so many of you were there, and the fact that you have the art center in there, it's all just very exciting stuff to me. Next, please, Pete. That's the end. So I think we got there, Jennifer.
Perfect.
Wasn't easy.
That's great. Thank you. I can open up the document that you sent to us.
That would be
Scott,
great.
Yeah.
And Pete, you might jump in on some of these answers. What I find interesting in working with Pete the most, but it's true with Bob and Charlie, but is, sure, I'm the lead consultant, but I like to give freedom of thought and opinion to each of these guys. And in Pete's case, since we work closely on land projects that have uses of buildings that relate to uses of land, it's particularly informative. So how would you like to go through them, Jennifer? Could I get a show of hands if anybody's read these, or has nobody seen these answers previously?
It's just a select few. So describing your overall project approach and your process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can just.
So if you want, I have a hard copy here. I'll just kind of talk through sort of the responses that we wrote, and maybe you can. Maybe Pete can follow along with the screen, or if you're rolling it, Jennifer, maybe you can. Essentially, oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. We good for me to go?
I'm sharing the screen, so I'll just scroll as you speak.
Yeah, that sounds great. So the first question was, what's our overall approach and process? And, you know, to boil it down to bullet points is kind of not doing it justice, but I think if you look at it sort of abstractly, the first phase is, you know, if we get to go ahead, all of us somewhat simultaneously, because we have different focuses, we'll be, you know, gathering information. Like I said, usually Seiler Jury likes to get in first, create the base plans, because then other, in Charlie's case for engineering, he uses them as he does his thing, Bob uses them. And then in Pete's case, I thought we would draw the building plans, locate them approximately near each other, and then Pete, who's also gathering site information, and actually it's Bill Collins, actually, who's the principal who will be doing the work, but with Pete's staff, is researching the history of the site. He's got very specific ideas on what kind of excites him about the cultural, you know, landscape up there. And then similarly, Bob, I'm expecting you to be sort of gathering your timeline histories and understanding how these buildings grew. So the first step is gather information. Then really, we share that with you without really too much, you know, trying not to have biased opinions, and brainstorm, no questions or bad questions kind of approach, and start kicking around how we're going to get to where this project is going to go. But ultimately, if our second phase is come up with the programs for these buildings, which ultimately are uses, and those come from the site outward, you know, like what's appropriate for this location and this site and how it sits in the setting, but also, you know, what do the buildings lend themselves to? What's their structural capacity? What's their condition? What's their interesting fabric? So the next one is develop a program and uses. Then we start to make recommendations. If we want, say we want a nature center, or we want some kind of, who knows what, public bathrooms accessible from the outside, then we try to study how do we fit that in there. And one of the first steps of this is down to C, Pete, plan recommendations. You know, you might just read these little notes here, but you know, some of that is where Bob's telling us about what's the philosophy, what are the zone A most important fabric elements that shouldn't be disturbed, what's less important, can certain wings come off of the Satterwade house, for instance, you know, could certain buildings be lost or totally mothballed, that kind of approach.
Yeah, Doug, can I just interrupt you for one second?
Yeah, why don't both of you?
Going back to program, you know, I think we have at this point more questions than answers.
Yes.
And I thought the ad hoc committee's definition of a farm and the materials you gave us was quite interesting, that you need to have a farmland equipment, but you want to have a farmer living on the property. And I think that gets to the program. I don't think you've fully fleshed out your program, at least not in your document that you've given us. I mean, is that an eventual goal, to have a farmer living there? You know, with our work with sustainable ag, we have found out that one of the big issues is farm worker housing. That's a really hard thing, and it's also one of the things we've found out, that there are a lot of young farmers out there, but they can't afford to get connected to the land. So how do you do that? So I think you know, all of those things come into your program, and I think we have to flesh out the program in more detail with you. before we can get to step C plan recommendations, because things like how the site is broken up. What we should look at historic aerials and see if there were historic windbreaks or different sort of agricultural rooms on the property. And are there sensitive areas of the site that shouldn't be farmed where we need to protect a riparian corridor? And all of those things sort of enter into the program. So that's just a real quick summary of some of the things that we would look at with you with the programming.
Great, Pete, thanks. So I think on these things, it's a process where it sort of slows down until we can complete it, and then they might speed up and you do the next one. But essentially it goes in a fairly linear order. At some point we're making plan recommendations so we can develop costs, and then at some point, we all look at each other. We have these costs, we have these alternatives. Some buildings will be obvious. There's one use or no use. Others might have multiple uses. But as a group, we will be the editors, sort of, and the mouthpiece writing a report that gives you this final tool that you use for fundraising and future development. I think the thing I'd add, and maybe Pete and Bob, you've talked on it as we've talked about it, is this is an early step to a long process for this site. I brought, well, maybe I'll talk about why I brought the landscape component in when that specific question comes up. So I'll pause here and go to the next question.
Say, Doug, a question.
Sure, Dennis.
As you described that, you just described that rather linear process. Where in that process or how in that process are you facilitating public input, community involvement, community input?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this with Pete, but I'll start first, Pete. And that is, I think my personal view is you all might know a lot about what the public wants here. That said, for instance, Plymouth Township, they thought they knew, they felt they knew, they didn't have any public meetings, except towards the end. Another client that Pete and I worked with, Whitpain, very much wanted that public. They wanted this process to be very public. And one of the reasons why I brought Simone Collins is they're so good at this process of having these discussions and conducting them. And I don't know, Pete, do you want to thread that needle on how it works and how you want to do it?
Sure. And at first I should note that, the RFP didn't really mention public involvement, and our proposal assumed we'd be working with a steering committee or the ad hoc committee. So we're always a proponent of public meetings and public involvement. And it also helps if you're going to state agencies for funding. They like to see a history of public involvement with the site. And so we think it's important, and you always find out things that you don't know after you've had the public involvement. And it also, the public involvement is also important for building a constituency of stewards for this land, because ultimately future boards of supervisors or commissioners, I can't remember what you have, are going to need continuing public support. So you really want to develop a friends of type of organization that's going to support this farm for years and come here and patronize it. And that's also a reason to involve the public. And it's also to have some limited recreational facilities, whether it's, simple trails or events or those types of things, so that people come and learn about why local sustainable agriculture is so important. And there's so many reasons, I'm sure you know all of them, but that's a story that can be told and retold many times.
Thank you.
Okay, should we, question 2, Jennifer, keep going?
Yeah, we just, and this can be brief. We just wanted to confirm that you're comfortable with the fees you presented for the scope.
Yeah, I think we are. I think the reality of it is we've gave you an aggressive fee. It's an exciting project. all my team members are people that we've worked together, so we don't waste a lot of time getting down to business. And Seiler Jury at least works pretty fast and we're pretty efficient. And so, yeah, we're comfortable with those fees. We might have misunderstood the ad alternate cost question in the RFP, and that is, we assumed that we would be drawing, accurate floor plans of every one of these buildings, just so we have their footprint and their relationship to each other. So the short answer to your question is, we're going to measure and draw plans of all 15 buildings. And then we're drawing the elevations of the two large houses, Satterway being the most complicated, and the small little cottage. And then the other 12, which are fairly simple buildings, a couple of them, the Well House by Patterson, and I think maybe the small Well Barn are a little more complicated. But it doesn't take that long to draw these buildings. We won't be measuring the width of every board. We'll be drawing it as, board and batten siding, but every window, every feature, every proportion, they'll be drawn to scale. So yeah, and again, maybe it was a little lower than it should have been as a number, but Mike Drury, who estimates these things, said these are simple and we'll draw them fast. So I did break it out just as a courtesy. They're almost kind of ridiculous numbers, but it's based on, a few hours with a draftsman after we've surveyed them, with already drawn a plan. I think we won't be charging you more than this, and value wise, we won't be. I'm not unhappy with that number. Is the short answer.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You keep
that's
going.
all right. That's all right. I was just going to say that this next one is just, we'd like to know about your methodology regarding the site and landscape. And I actually think Peter has covered this fairly comprehensively so far this evening.
I think so.
Good.
Okay.
And then there's a written narrative here that sort of supports it. So,
Right,
and I'd be happy to share with you, Jennifer, after this call or this presentation.
Okay.
So
This next one was regarding our schedule. Just we wanted feedback on that. Is it feasible / realistic? What would it take?
It's a matter of how much time there is between iterations, and iteration is a word that Pete uses on this process. 5 months is a little short, but here's my thoughts on it, Pete and Jennifer, and that's this. Peter and Bill do master plans of entire giant sites. I want that knowledge, that mindset, that focus, but I'm talking about 2 farmstead parcels that have a group of buildings. And I want the big picture to inform me as we discuss uses, like where's parking? Is there a trailhead? How far does the public come? What does the farmer do? Those are big pictures that I need Pete and you for. But I think if we stick to the buildings and don't try to master plan a whole campus, Pete, which isn't in the fee anyway, and if we get feedback from the committees, 5 months is possible.
Yeah, I think that if the committee, and again, I mentioned we hadn't included public involvement. We're very happy to do that. And would be, that would be great. But if we go to, a series of public meetings, you will need more than 5 months.
Yeah.
And again, that was not clear to us in the RFP. And so I think that's the only caveat there. The other thing a quick schedule does is you have to judge how quickly as a committee or a township or a consultant working with a township and a committee can make decisions, because we're going to put stuff in front of you and you're going to have to make decisions. And so if you're a committee that typically takes I'll call it a Quaker approach and goes through consensus and looks at every angle, and it takes a long time, maybe we need more time. If you're a sort of a little more of a dictatorial committee, maybe you can make decisions quickly. That's for you to judge. So I think that has to be factored in here.
The only other thing to add is sometimes with schedule, we work backwards from either a funding deadline or a political sort of public announcement or a year-end budget or, you know, things like that, and sort of work backwards for scheduling. But 5 months is doable, 7's better. Beyond that's just, it's too inefficient in my opinion.
Okay, well, we would look to you to refine the schedule if we were to invite you to help us implement this master plan.
Okay.
Yeah, with public involvement.
Right.
Okay. And I don't know if you want to talk about that some tonight or not, as far as how much public involvement. I did assume, Pete, that there'd be a supervisors meeting or some kind of presentation, you know, sort of when we're wrapping up. But just like we're doing with the Trail Junction Center for Montgomery County now, these public meetings were great.
Mhm.
But they do. So should we, Jennifer and Dennis, think about a meeting or two in this process and weave it into this schedule and modify a fee to allow that to happen? Or what are your thoughts on that? Or is that not an option at this point? It'd be more a post-engagement discussion.
I think at this time, let's continue going through all of these questions, and then the committee can talk if we have something that we need to ask you to refine.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I think on the add alternates for the buildings, I think if you decide to do them all, it adds some time, but our expectation is to spend 2 or 3 full days up there with 2 or 3 of us measuring every inch of these things. So it shouldn't add much time for us to draw them all. Drawing them all is a nice thing. At Harriet Weatherall, we didn't draw them all. We did pictures, kind of like I showed you we did for the Marywood Park House with annotations. But drawings are nice, and you know, they have wings, and they'll get used for years to come. So as different phases are done, so we're all for them.
Doug, just a question on that. As you mentioned, the Harriet Weatherall project, approximately what was the cost of that master plan for that?
Gosh,
basically old farm site that seemed somewhat analogous.
I could probably get that for you. I wasn't the lead. It was had to have been a 12-month process.
Okay.
So I don't know, but I can track it down for you.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Thank you.
And it wouldn't hurt, Dennis, to contact Plymouth Township. It was done through the Parks and Rec department because they owned it, but it was a great process, and partially because it was driven by uses, but they had a market study consultant, and Pete mentioned that to me. Pete, remember we were talking, you said there's no market, what do you call them, market analyst or something? Or
Right.
Do you want to touch on that, Pete? Does that seem
No,
appropriate?
I mean, often we Mermaid Lake was a good example. We brought in a market analyst to look at the market for some of the proposed uses for the adaptive reuse of some of the buildings at Mermaid Lake. We did the same thing up at the quarry I mentioned to you for Mercer County, where we looked at the primary market area and what kinds of active recreation uses were in demand, including some extreme sports uses. So it's always great to do a market study. And the other option, of course, you have is to send out, and it's very low cost, RFIs to the private sector for adaptive reuse of the buildings. I mean, one of the things I noticed was in your information, you also mentioned the Slack House over at Makefield Highlands. And we're just wondering, have you ruled out an events venue or some type of let's say a 3 seasons event barn here at the farm? We don't know your thoughts on that, but in terms of sustainability and income production, I love arts organizations, but they're not known for generating lots of income that can even maintain buildings. So I think that's a very practical and realistic sort of thing we all have to look at, is how are you going to maintain or generate costs just to even maintain buildings, because it's significant.
Pete, this is Ron Schmidt here. I don't want to take away from answering all these questions, but earlier on you mentioned you did work at Pennsbury Manor and have done work for PHMC. I've been associated with Pennsbury Manor for over 10 years.
Oh, wow.
You don't have to answer me tonight, but I would like to know what you did at Pennsbury Manor in terms of restorations and when you did it.
Sure.
You probably dealt with Doug Miller then at the time.
Yes, sir.
The site administrator.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yep.
Please provide that at a later date.
Okay, sure.
Right. So question 7 about the existing reports. I found them very helpful. I mainly focused on the structural reports. It was a little discouraging to see the years that passed from the first structural report on Satterway to some of the later ones to see its evolution. But also it was interesting to see the Satterway barn. I noticed the photos, how kind of fresh the wood looked on the inside and that it looks like it was restored. So I think, Pete, as far as these uses, 3-season use for a barn, some of it's going to come from what's the condition of these barns.
Absolutely.
Charlie Timby and I were discussing just leading up to this, that very use, and barns typically aren't very robust structures, and assemblies are 100 pounds per square foot live load. But if you're willing to sacrifice the stable floor, the lower level with a lot of structure, the Rodale Institute has a 3-season event barn that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And they have events there all the time and they raise a lot of money with it. And it's beautiful. So Charlie, and Bob, that's one thing I'd like to look at potentially, because otherwise, what are these uses other than light storage and agricultural, And just one thing as an aside, things like the steamroller, that they should just, to me, sit on the site and rust. It's a fantastic object. People enjoy that stuff. I think having the public in this agricultural landscape and have it function is going to be part of where I want Simone and you all, your personal knowledge, to inform Bob and Charlie and I on how we deal with these buildings.
Yeah, I mean, the farmstead is a little bit like a zoo. I mean, you bring people to a zoo to entertain them. And by being entertained, they learn about the value of wildlife conservation and they become conservationists. I think the same thing is true at historic sites like this. And it's sort of the approach we took at Daniel Boone Homestead up in Berks County, that most people go to Daniel Boone Homestead to enjoy the 570 some acres of open space and bird watching. And by going there, they get hooked on the story of Daniel Boone and the history. I think this farm could be the same way. Most people will come here to enjoy the open space perhaps, and then get hooked into why this farm was important historically, but also why farming today is maybe local farming is more important than ever. So I think that story can be really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question was asking about your approach for gleaning stakeholder comments and input. And whenever we put the stakeholders / ad hoc, we were inferring that we know that we've got community voices that need to be heard, and that they'll be part of the information gathering process that will steer and influence decisions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want me to address that, Doug?
Why don't you, Pete?
Real quickly. I mean, what we always do in our projects, we do a very inexpensive survey monkey survey, public opinion survey, which is pennies on the dollar. And while it's not statistically valid, when we used to do phone surveys, we'd also do web surveys, and they were always within a couple of points. So we have a high confidence that we're going to get good opinions from the general public on projects like this. We can do public meetings, and again, if we supplement our proposal to add some public meetings, I wouldn't do any fewer than 2 and maybe 3, and that's a discussion with you. The other thing we can do is sometimes we do focus groups, and I'm not sure that's appropriate here. And the other thing we can do is key person or key agency interviews. So there's a whole range of public interaction that we're used to doing on almost every one of our projects. that, you know, depending on how deeply you want to go into that, we could propose to do.
Well, there's a couple thoughts I had just to build on that, Pete and Jennifer. And that is, when I read the RFP, it began as this is focused on the buildings, which means their fabric, their condition, their capabilities, their, you know, shaped, all that stuff. And I widened it to saying it needs to relate to how these buildings will function within a site, and this site functions within a region. But it's still not a giant master plan in my mind. I see this as effort that is done where we don't waste money. It can be a stepping stone for a future bigger master plan, because I don't think one's been done for the whole site that I'm aware of, at least. That master planner doesn't look at it and say, if only someone like Simone Collins had been involved to inform these crazy architects, because they missed everything. So I'm not visualizing necessarily it's as big as it could be, because it does have a narrow focus. But what I did visualize is very similar to the Marywood Park House that I showed you with the rendering of the porch and all that building. There were several constituencies that used that building. There was an arts organization, another nonprofit, a historical group, and the township. And I had, Pete, like a focus group evening around a long table with each group, and they invited as many outside friends and neighbors as they wanted to. And there were maybe 20 people around the table for, say, 3 meetings, which, Dennis, were quasi-public meetings. You know, I would say the arts group brought friends and the historical society brought friends. And that's the type of that's kind of the public outreach that I envision for our fee, not like we've done for the Trail Junction Center, Pete, or you did for Mermaid, which were, you know, phenomenal events, but they're much broader, much more advertised, much bigger fee, bigger effort. Maybe not, maybe that's more appropriate, Dennis and Jennifer and others, but that's what I just described as what I thought we were doing.
Jennifer, I just comment briefly. I find it very interesting, the thought that this could be tied to a much larger issue, which is why farming is important in this community. I frankly think you're onto something there. I think it ties it to a much larger issue.
That's really interesting, Ron, because Bill Collins, I wish he was here. Every time we meet with him, Pete, he's saying, it's all about the soil. It's all about the cultural history of this soil as an industrial landscape. It's fantastic to hear him talk about it.
Well, it is, and it's also, in terms of sustainable agriculture and local agriculture, I mean, we just went through a pandemic, and we see how easily the supply chain breaks down. And I'm a firm believer that in the future, local agriculture is going to be more important than the agriculture we all eat from now. So anyway, that's a whole philosophical statement. But it is, I think it is very important.
Let me just follow up question. In terms of the proposal you've submitted so far, is some of this broader effort included in those numbers, or would this be additional if we went to a larger messaging effort?
It's a little bit of yes, and let me just say, Pete, and then you can follow up.
Yep.
I brought Pete in to bring that knowledge so that when I talk about, so Pete, at the Patterson Farmstead, which has this road that loops through the middle and leaves no room for parking, if we do a shortcut driveway, where do we put parking? And if you were doing a master plan someday in the future on this park, where would your trailhead be? Would you have 2 trailheads, or would it be here? And how does that relate to? So I think it's the professional this is what I'm visioning, Ron. It's the professional's educated guess so that I don't misstep in this process as I orient a use in a building. But it's not a master plan as I'm envisioning it, Pete, because it's much more of an effort and much more of a study that you need to do. And why don't you talk about that for a minute, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a site diagram I mean, I think some of the things that are probably going to be feasible here from a recreational standpoint or a visitor standpoint are relatively simple. And I think, to answer your question, Ron, I think the reason our team can be efficient is we've done a lot of this work, and we have, if you read our mission statement, and I should know it by heart, but I don't, but it revolves around creating an ecologically sustainable society. And that's what we really believe here. And that's why farming is important. So you're going to get all that knowledge and that sort of ecological perspective on how the farm should be treated. And as I mentioned, we have lots of questions for you in terms of your program for the farm, which, I don't know whether you fully explored those or not, but I think at least we'll ask the questions and verify that we've looked under every stone, so to speak.
Thank you.
If I can make a comment based on the information that Doug was presenting, it seems like the first step that you're looking for is input from stakeholders, and that's why we're here. But would it be helpful, and this is kind of out in left field, would it be helpful to have those people who have kind of vested interest so far, who are already on the site, who already have kind of information in terms of utility of the space, and that they might present a narrative as to how they see it, and just do it in 2 pages or 3 pages that you can have as somebody else's dream. I'm particularly asking this because of my wife, Dr. Hines, who has a lot to do with the Satterthwaite House and the use of the land around it. So it's kind of self-serving a little bit, but I'm wondering whether that might actually help. And then it's not necessarily going to a meeting and get discussions about it, but just see someone's broad idea. And AOI could have one, maybe the people who are in the village could have one, and the neighbors adjacent in developments.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Like a great idea.
Yeah.
I think all input is needed. And one of the things that I know that we've talked about, that we want broad community input.
Yeah.
We have a lot of specific input from a couple narrow interests, well documented, understood, appreciated. But we can have just a couple voices, speaking for 33,000 people in Lower Makefield, or in Buck, or 670,000 people in Bucks County. So yes, all of that input is good, but I think we want to be careful and need to go to lengths to get broad input of the general public that I think Ron mentioned, education, that aren't even aware of what's at Patterson Farm today, have no idea what it could be or what it is today. We need that too. So, and I think that's where we need the effort, quite frankly. I think the narrow interest, getting that input is easy, quote unquote, but getting the broad input takes an effort, and I think is important. Otherwise, I'm afraid, we spend another decade as a football.
I wasn't discounting that. I was just saying, in order to put together a kind of a continuum that somebody sees and has a vision about, that they could share that up front, and that could be maybe stimulate something that nobody has thought about so far. So thank you.
Right. I get it.
Well, we have reached the end of our time. There's some other comments that we'd like to squeeze in tonight. Now's your opportunity. And I'll turn it back over to Dennis, because he's the leader.
Well, it's a committee. Committees make camels when they try to design horses. So to the committee or invited stakeholders, any other questions for the team that we have on, and I really appreciate your bringing on a broad team and having a dialogue. That's useful. Questions that are burning on anybody's tongue right now? Okay, hearing none.
I just have to say, Dennis, Charlie gets like the award. The rest of you should take classes. Like, what a beautiful background, Charlie. We appreciate your vision.
You know,
We understand that you get us.
I'm just trying to get you in the mood, that's all. And besides, Doug won't let me talk.
Well done, well done.
Charlie's the master. I wish he would talk more.
Yeah.
I know the committee needs to meet and kind of digest what we've heard tonight and process that, compare notes, and so we will do that. In the meantime, I'd like Doug, Charlie, Pete, all of you. Thank you, Bob, very much for your interest in this project. You've said many times how excited you are about it. And I assure you, we are as well.
Great. Well, we hope we're lucky and get the award, and thank you for this opportunity.
Great.
You're welcome.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay,
Thank you.
folks.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
As they sign off, I could just ask the committee, is there any other business? We do have a meeting next Thursday, the 12th, on the calendar. And there's always other business that we could do, but I'm respectful of the clock on the wall at 9:33. But is there anything urgent that anybody needs to or wants to bring up?
Dennis, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's my understanding at next week's meeting, we'll make a recommendation.
That would be the goal. That is the
Okay, then
goal.
can I ask Jennifer to share the responses to questions that were submitted?
Yes, Dennis and Fred have those and they will issue those.
All right, thank you.
And I think what I would propose to help us process and digest this in the next week is maybe some one-on-one exchanges of emails and conversations. I'm happy to jump on a call with more than one, just to kind of compare notes. I have a ton of notes from both bidders that I want to go through and see if other people felt the same way or not. So why don't I just individually set up some calls amongst the committee here? We can try to coalesce a little bit before we meet on the public Zoom on the 12th. Would that work?
That'd be great.
Good.
And Jennifer, are you happy to be a part of any or all of those?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's all right. I'll take on that assignment to set up some calls, and we'll work through the availability over the next 7 days.
I guess my question with regards to the second presenter is, are there things that we felt were not in their proposal that were out of scope compared to what we wanted? I mean, like, for example, the discussion we had around input, and do we need to have a revised estimate from them before we can review this?
If I could say something, my take is they didn't understand that when we were talking about stakeholders and input, that we were talking about beyond our committee. So I did identify that in public meetings or talking to key agencies, focus groups, all that is considered additional service to them. We would need to find out what that effort would cost. And I think that we need to agree with your attorney, make sure we can go back and ask them to modify if that's something that we can do during this process, or if we would need to engage them and then talk about additional services.
Yeah, I think we could ask for some cost estimates associated with those things. If they were selected and we chose to add them, what would they, how much would they be? Yeah. Or what would the impact be? I'm sorry, Ron?
Yeah, the other thing I'd add, Jennifer, is, and casting no aspersions on either one of those agencies, but there might be other groups that can better implement that for us. I mean, we've asked them to run this project, but in terms of public outreach and trying to bring people in and our own advocacy of what we're doing, there might be other groups that would do that better. I'm not trying to walk away from the two you've brought in, trust me. It's just that they're architects and landscape people. You know, it's more communications people that do that other thing. So just put that into your thinking, okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also the market study aspect, which is completely out of their bailiwick,
Yeah.
but very interesting to consider.
Yeah.
I thought that was a point well taken.
I thought, yeah.
That was certainly a key note of mine, is the market assessments. We tried to do a little bit of that in our initial recommendations in terms of, you know, working with some real estate agents and things to try to do some market assessments of potential uses and worth. But it was a shadow of what I'm thinking we may want to do now in terms of true market assessments of different work. And like the community outreach, you know, that's a separate professional service that we could recruit.
Yeah, I think that's why they brought Simone in.
Yeah.
Because of their experience with public participation. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Other comments or discussion at this juncture? I appreciate everybody's patience. A couple hours on a Thursday night.
see you next Thursday.
No one has anything else to do. I know. I appreciate your interest. Okay. If that's the case, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
All in favor? All right. Good night, all.
Right.